Hello, everyone. It's great to have so many of you joining our team from across the U.S. My name is Lauren Bloomquist, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst for Education Commission of the States. I want to thank you for joining us for our webinar on enhancing wage records to align post-secondary and workforce outcomes. We have a great discussion in store for you today with the ECS team and our partner, the Strada Education Foundation. Please note that we are recording the webinar today to allow you to revisit the content as well as share with your colleagues. If this is the first time you're joining us, Partnering for Success is designed to provide you, our commissioners and policymakers, with opportunities to connect with peers, researchers, and innovators who are providing solutions to some of today's most pressing education policy issues. We hope that when you leave this webinar, you have valuable insights, fresh inspiration, and practical resources to help you tackle similar challenges in your own state. On behalf of the ECS team, I'd like to thank our partners who help make events like this possible. Thank you for your continued partnership and support that allow us to convene the people behind the policy. We are especially pleased to join forces again with the Strada Education Foundation for this important conversation on enhancing wage records to align post-secondary and workforce outcomes. Today's webinar focuses on how enhanced wage records can help states better align post-secondary and workforce systems. These records build on already existing unemployment insurance data collection by adding fields like job title and work location. States can use this new data to better understand the labor market and discover which jobs offer real opportunity, offering policymakers, education and workforce leaders, and students a clearer insight into how education and training pathways translate into employment, earnings, and mobility. This is the final webinar in our three-part post-secondary series, presented in partnership with Strada, a national leader in strengthening education to employment pathways. This discussion today is also accompanied by a blog entitled Education and Workforce Benefits of Enhanced Wage Records, which offers several examples of states that have added fields to the wage record and how those additional elements offer a powerful tool to better understand the connections between post-secondary education, training, and job quality. I encourage you to check it out by clicking in the link that we've shared in the chat. As you listen to today's insights shared today, we also want to hear from you. So as you follow along, please be sure to place your questions at the bottom of the Q&A, in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Strada's Senior Director of Employment Alignment, Andrew Hanson. As the Senior Director, he leads the research and strategic initiatives to bring employers and educators to design and redesign education to better connect people with opportunity. He has 15 years of experience as a researcher focused on the intersection between education and opportunity. He has an academic background in economics, education, and philosophy. He's also the first-generation college graduate and an alumnus for Teach for America. Andrew's going to start us off with a presentation highlighting the variety of ways enhanced wage records can help answer some of the most pressing questions about job quality. Welcome, Andrew. We're really glad to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Lauren. And I'm excited to share why enhancing employment data is one of the most impactful steps that states can take to connect education and work more effectively. And really excited to hear from our panel of leaders around the country who are doing remarkable work leveraging enhanced data in their state. Before we dive in, just a quick word about Strada. We are a foundation that works to connect education to opportunity through research, grant making, investing, and public policy solutions. And our Institute for the Future of Work advances actionable research to strengthen talent pipelines for employers, expand pathways to opportunity for individuals, as well as to help states leverage their education and employment data to connect people to good jobs. So whether you're a policymaker, an educator, or a workforce leader, our research is designed to help you make smarter, more data-informed decisions. Lauren, as you mentioned just this morning, the Institute published a new brief, What States Should Know About Education and Work, but Don't, in close partnership with our clear outcomes, and public policy teams. So in that brief, we make the case that despite investing billions of dollars in education, states still lack answers to basic questions about the employment outcomes of education programs. At the same time, by making a few simple enhancements to the employment data that they already collect, states can give policymakers, educators, employers, and people insights that they need to make better decisions. Here are some examples of the kinds of questions that states typically cannot answer about a given education program. What kind of jobs are people who complete the program employed in? Where are the people who complete the program working in the state? What is a typical completer's hourly wage? What is their salary? Does that wage or salary enable them to be self-sufficient? Are education programs or targeted workforce funds delivering the intended benefits to individuals and the public? So if a program's designed to produce more graduates in tech jobs, do those graduates actually get tech jobs? To what extent are employers offering internships and apprenticeships? What's the relative supply of and demand for different kinds of talent? Does the state need more or fewer nursing, STEM, humanities, or business graduates, for example? And which first jobs post-completion lead to career advancement and which one are dead ends? So in our view, the fact that states can't answer this question reflects not just a data gap, but a blind spot that leaves policymakers, families, employers, and others making really high stakes decisions with little clarity about what is going to pay off. As I mentioned, the good news is that states can answer all these questions and more by enhancing their employment data. And there are 4 enhancements that we think are critical for leveling up that employment data. The first is occupation. What kind of job do you have? Pay rate. How much do you make, typically on an hourly basis? Location, where do you work, geographically speaking? And worker type, are you a regular employee, or an intern, apprentice, or something else? We think that adopting these enhancements is going to bring a wide range of benefits to stakeholders. For individuals and families, they can choose programs that lead to the outcomes they want. Policymakers can make smarter investments. Educators can demonstrate the value of the programs they have and better align those programs with opportunity. Employers can get better visibility into talent pipelines so they can address shortages and make smarter hiring decisions. And economic developers can establish talent strategies that support the competitiveness of their state's workforce and economy. So to make this a little bit more tangible, what we do in the brief is pull together a series of hypothetical analyses and charts that reflect what states typically know now and what they could know with enhanced employment data. So the first is, what if states knew not only how much graduates earned, but also the career pathways of those graduates. So we take a hypothetical psychology program at Jane Doe University, or JDU, for example. Most states would typically know that how much the graduates of that program earned in the previous quarter, and they can use that to estimate or calculate their annual earnings. So in this case, $48,000 a year. Then on the right side, with the enhanced data, they could also determine the kinds of jobs that those graduates were employed in, as well as how much the graduates in those fields were earning respectively. So for example, you can see in this case, 25% are working as HR specialists, earning $65,000 a year, but 20% are working in office administration, earning $38,000 a year. Also, what if states knew not only whether a graduate worked in the state, but also where they work? Today, most states typically know that, say, 82% of those JDU psych grads would be working in the state. With enhanced data, they would also know whether the graduates stayed in the same region as JDU, whether they moved to a different region in the state, or whether they're just not captured in the state's employment data system for various reasons. And they wouldn't know only, whether they stayed in the same region, but actually the specific region that the graduates of the program are moving to. So regions can have a deeper understanding of how they're sourcing their talent. Enhanced data would also enable states and educators to determine the extent to which the graduates of different kinds of programs are getting college level jobs, meaning jobs for which you typically need a degree. So for example, Jane Doe University could know that 77% of the graduates of its health programs are getting college level jobs, while 43% of its business administration graduates are getting college level jobs. States could also know which first jobs post completion are springboards to economic mobility and which ones are dead ends. So, for example, they might know that nearly all the hypothetical graduates of JDU who become financial analysts or marketing associates end up advancing their careers, while only 1 in 4 of the graduates who work as admin assistants do. And I mentioned earlier states who have targeted funds for education and training, whether they're trying to prepare more workers for tech or healthcare. Today, most states could calculate how much somebody benefits, who benefits from those funds earns. With enhanced data, they could also determine how many people got hired in, say, tech jobs as a result of their program, as well as their associated wage or salary. What about work-based learning? How many students have access to work-based learning? Of course, many of us, including Strada, are focused working to expand access to work-based learning, such as internships and apprenticeship. Right now, states know very little about whether students and learners more broadly have access to these experiences. With enhanced data, states could both know how many employers are offering work-based learning opportunities, as well as get detailed insights into how widespread different forms of work-based learning actually are. And finally, a major limitation that most states experience is that they typically know that graduates' earnings are low, but not whether it's because their wage or salary, it's because of their wage or salary, or because of how much they worked. So with enhanced data, they could get a better, more sophisticated understanding of what's driving those low earnings. Are graduates' earnings low because of that low wage or salary, or because they're only working in part-time or part of the quarter? So a question that naturally arises in these conversations is, is this going to be a burden to employers? And it's a good question. And it's certainly true that employers will have to report additional data. And it is super important for states to enhance their data to effectively engage with the employer community in their state. In practice, however, most employers already track these data elements through HR platforms like Workday or ADP. And for states who have electronic wage reporting set up, tends to be quite manageable, actually. There are also organizations such as the U.S. Chamber Foundation who are working to help states streamline reporting by standardizing and automating that reporting. So while states definitely have to take these concerns seriously, as I mentioned, most employers already collect this data, and the leading states have shown that this integration is certainly feasible and scalable when approached thoughtfully. And we have been inspired to see growing momentum in states who have recognized that enhancing their data is giving them a competitive edge in understanding the relationship between education and employment. West Virginia and South Carolina are a couple of examples of states who have had remarkable success so far, still early, I would say, but at leveraging these enhanced data in recent years, and very delighted to have Dr. Grady and Dr. Price tell us a little bit about that during the discussion. I should also acknowledge that enhancing employment data is certainly not a cure-all. It is, however, a starting point for understanding which programs truly open doors to opportunity. And I'd like to mention a related step that we are partnering with states on, which involves establishing or leveling up their education to employment analytics capabilities that will really go a long way to enable them to leverage these and other integrated education and workforce data and translate them into actionable insights. One example is the Virginia Office of Education Economics, which was established in 2021 and has served as a model for other states who are interested in leveling up those capabilities. So with that, many thanks to our partners at ECS, certainly to our panelists and to everyone else joining today. If you are interested in learning more, I would encourage you to email us at the email listed here. If you want to learn more, discuss how to get started, please reach out and look forward to the panel conversation.
Thank you, Andrew, for that informative presentation and setting the stage to hear from our panelists who have enhanced wage record data experience. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our panelists. First, we have Bryan Grady, Assistant Executive Director for Labor Market Information at the South Carolina Department of Employment and the Workforce. We also have Steve Rogness, Senior Research Analyst and State Longitudinal Education Data System Coordinator from the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. And we have Kish Cumi Price, who is the Project Manager at the Marshall Skills Exchange and Marshall Inside. Bryan, I'd like to start with you with our first question. And I'd like to ask, what was the impetus for South Carolina to collect additional wage record data? And what did the initial effort to get the program up and running entail?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. Well, the short answer is the legislature told us to. There was a statute that passed in 2023 called the Statewide Education and Workforce Development Act. And that was passed basically almost exactly 2 years ago. And where that came from was in 2022, there were a couple of developments that were particularly notable. One was the fact that job openings essentially hit a record high in the sort of the spring back from the pandemic. So there were a lot of businesses who were having a lot of trouble finding the workers that they needed, and they were making that known to elected officials and really anyone who would listen. The second thing that happened at the same time was that we had a new Speaker of the House who was elected in South Carolina. His name's Merle Smith, and he was elected at the end of the 2022 session. And he said when he came in that economic and workforce development was going to be his top priority. So he convened meetings throughout the rest of 2022, agency heads, corporate executives, a wide swath of people. And that led to that statute. It was introduced and sponsored by the speaker and passed into law at the end of that session. So what that did, among many, many other things, was establish the requirement that employers had to provide standard occupation classification codes, those SOC codes, 6-digit number from the feds that describes what kind of work somebody is doing, and the number of hours that they worked in that quarter. And that's in addition to the federally required data elements that are in that unemployment insurance wage record. My agency administers the unemployment insurance system for South Carolina, so that data is housed here. And we had less than a year to sort of stand this whole thing up because the bill passed in May of 23, and starting with the first quarter of 2024, businesses had to report this data. So what happened was our unemployment insurance staff, people like me and my staff, went out and got in front of as many microphones as we could. So we went to HR meetings, accountant conferences, things like that, to make sure that everybody was aware of these requirements, that they understood what was going on. We put together a bunch of materials on our website to make sure that employers had all the resources that they need to provide those SOC codes, since it was for many people an entirely foreign concept. To the point where we even have, to this day, we still have a Microsoft Teams hotline where employers can contact a member of my staff and have a dedicated appointment time to answer any questions that they have. So we flipped the switch with the first quarter data, which we collected in April of 2024. And we've now collected 5 quarters worth of data with these enhanced values. And the compliance rate has blown us away. Honestly, we're getting basically about 80% of records have a SOC code, and of those, 90% of those are valid. And so we're going through the process of contacting businesses that did not provide valid SOC codes, and then also contacting businesses where they sent us SOC codes that, to use a technical term, are weird. So, for example, we had a school district that said they did not have any elementary school teachers, and we were like, that's probably not right. We're gonna call them and see what's up. So there's been a lot of there's been contact by phone, email, postal mail. We've really put on a pretty full court press, and we've had I would say the reaction, certainly there are some people who don't like red tape and they're just never going to like red tape, but the business community has been receptive because we made the case very clearly that we were doing this for a reason, that we were going to provide deliverables back to the business community so that they were getting something out of this. And so we're already working on products that will evaluate things like turnover rates by occupation that essentially have never been reported in South Carolina at scale. So there are a lot of products that we're going to be using with that. As you saw in the slide presentation, we're going to be using it to evaluate career pathway data. We're going to be using it in reports on our supply gap analysis and return on investment analysis. That's going to be looking at how well supply and demand match, and how frequently people are, as you heard, working in the fields for which they were trained. So there's a lot out there, and sort of the next frontier that's being worked on is the concept of how do we collaborate as states so that we are able to follow people across state lines as they move in and out of a state. If they were, educated in state X and work in state Y, both of those states probably want to know what's going on there. So there's efforts by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and others to try to work on ways to do that. You also have the multi-state data collaboratives, which are housed at the Coleridge Initiative and the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. So, as you saw, there's we're going to hear about West Virginia. There's I would say somewhere, I believe, high single digits in terms of states that have implemented some sort of enhanced wage record. And it's definitely a percolating topic because people are seeing, as you saw in the presentation, all the potential benefits that come from just adding a couple more columns to a spreadsheet.
Great. Thank you, Bryan. It sounds like you've been really successful in engaging kind of the employment community and making sure that everybody kind of understands what can be had when you collect these bits of data, what kind of powerful information comes from that. Steve, I'd like to move on to you. In Andrew's presentation, he highlighted some of the questions that enhanced wage data can be answered for state leaders. How is Minnesota's Office of Higher Education using enhanced wage records to make connections between the work in higher education and the labor market?
Thanks. Yeah, and hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you. Thanks for having me as part of this conversation. The enhancement that I'll be talking about is hours worked, which we have in Minnesota employment data, and maybe some background on my work too, just so you know where I'm coming from where I sit. So two halves of my job, really. One, I manage our the Minnesota Office of Higher Education's enrollment and awards conferred data collections. So that's the student level data that we collect from basically every public and private college in the state. That's data that we contribute to our state longitudinal data system, SLEDS, where the other half of my job is serving as our agency's coordinator with that data system. Each of the three lead agencies on SLEDS in Minnesota, so Office of Higher Education, Minnesota Department of Education for K-12 data, and the Department of Employment and Economic Development, DEED, for the employment data. Each of our three agencies have partially funded positions, coordinator positions embedded in the agency to work with our state longitudinal data system. And that's really where a lot of the collaboration on these data takes place. And hours worked. So I touch base with my colleagues at DEED in preparation for this panel. Hours worked was added in Minnesota, I think, back to around the late 2000s, so 15, 20 years ago now, and was driven by analysts at DEED, at our workforce agency, that saw the value in being able to analyze hours worked and all of the different questions that could be answered and analyses that could be done with that data. I'm going to highlight 3 published examples that I think someone's going to drop the links into the chat here for me. And so you can go peruse these on your own time or start looking at them right now. But 3 ways where you can see how hours worked is used in Minnesota. Our primary tool where we publish employment outcomes of college graduates is our graduate employment outcomes tool that is published by Deed. It uses data from our longitudinal data system, SLEDS, pairing the completion data from our agency, college completion data, with the employment data set from Deed. And one of the basic things, of course, is that hours worked gives us the ability to express earnings as hourly wages. And so that the Deed graduate employment outcomes tool, which is that first link, publishes median hourly wages as well as median annual earnings at various time points after college graduation. So we're just very used to having hours worked as part of this analysis and being able to express earnings outcomes in terms of hourly wages. Of course, having hours worked also gives us the ability to analyze patterns of full-time versus part-time work and to disaggregate outcomes by full-time versus part-time. In this second example link here is part of our SLEDS public reports. And in particular, I linked, it should go directly to one that'll show you employment outcomes for high school graduates who didn't go to college. And I grabbed that one because that's one that does that disaggregation where you can see by different buckets of how many hours worked per week on average. You can see the associated hourly pay rate for those different buckets. So that's just an example of the kind of sophistication we can get to now to see how those patterns of pay vary based on part-time, full-time work. And also just the ability to look at just what % of graduates are working full-time versus what % are working part-time. I touched base with researchers at the University of Minnesota who have used this data, and that's one way they've used hours worked is just to really just show, here's for graduates, here's overtime, here's the % of those that are found working in Minnesota, here's the % found working full-time, here's the % found working part-time. So very valuable information for folks in looking at employment outcomes of their graduates. The last one is analysis that I help with, our OAG dual training grant, an annual report. This is a program that pairs on-the-job training with post-secondary education, and it's a grant program for employers to do on-the-job training, paired with a post-secondary credential. And it's kind of buried in the report, but we do the analysis looking at hourly wages at the point of entry, hourly wages at the point of exit of the program, and then hourly wages a year after exit, and really highlight the wage gains on a per hour basis for participants in that program. And I know that's a data point that the folks that administer that program and the decision makers who are looking at that program really appreciate, being able to see that pre-post wage change. So a few examples there. And I'd also highlight, we're really interested in Minnesota in additional enhancements in wage records, in particular adding occupation. I mean, of course, we would love the ability to analyze the alignment of educational programs to what specific jobs folks are working in after graduation, both in terms of, programs that are preparing people for more specifically for a particular occupation, and also just looking at the range of occupations that different programs lead to, as was highlighted earlier in the presentation. And so that's certainly an enhancement that we're very interested in the future.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's great to hear about how Minnesota is using these enhanced wage records to have some practical application. Kish, I'd like to turn to you. At Marshall University, your focus is on engaging learners in online learning, especially micro-credentials. West Virginia collects SOC data and location, or just location data, or is it both SOC and location data?
Yes, it's both, occupation and location, yes.
In its wage record data, how do you see these additional data as an opportunity to drive your work?
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Glad to be here. And We are in, I think, a really exciting period where not only Marshall University is interested in how we can use these kind of data points to drive what we're doing, but also the state is also interested in doing this collectively. So we've partnered with the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission and Workforce West Virginia to really bring together all colleges and institutions just to see how we can do that better. So for us, we've been interested in not only how do we kind of plug the brain drain, but how do we build a more robust talent acquisition pipeline? So our focus has been on creating more accessible, flexible, and affordable learning for students. And one of the things for Marshall in particular, we have a very interesting population, student population, with about half of the students, undergrad students, being first-gen students, and also about half being Pell eligible. And when we start looking at graduation rates, we have about 39% that are completing within 6 years. So it's very, I think, important and critical for us to be in a place to provide more learning paths, more opportunities. We've partnered with our local community technical college, Mount West, to build micro pathways toward healthcare and advanced manufacturing. And, we really know that people are interested and they want to learn, they want to grow. And I think our president is really excited about making sure that we are a good partner for our industry partners and not moving at a slow pace. And so that's been one of our major, I think, points is just how do we do that better? And for those that don't know, he was formerly the CEO for Intuit. And so he understands and he gets it, and he wants us to be in a place where we're, meeting the needs of our learners and meeting the needs of our workforce partners. So that's our focus, is really just how can we better use this data, not just at Marshall, but statewide.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll ask a few more questions of the panel, and anybody who feels like jumping in is welcome to. One of the things with these enhanced wage records that you've mentioned is that the employers have to provide some of that data. So what are some of the other agencies and departments that need to work together for this to be a successful endeavor?
I could get us started on that question, Lauren. For us at the institutional level, we absolutely need support of our faculty members. So as we're building out these pathways and trying to figure out how to increase micro-credentials and things of that nature, we need buy-in. And so I think sometimes we sense tension when there's something new. And the more that we can, partner and understand why is really helps to move us in the direction we need to go. So for us, it's been about building our internal partners, our internal champions, and then also getting external support. And one way in doing that is partnering with other institutions, which we've been doing, our state agencies that are really driving the work in employment and education. And then also looking at funders who are interested in the work, because that helps us to be able to validate what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that's been our kind of secret sauce, if you will.
Yeah, so I was talking about the legislation that was passed a couple of years ago, and there were some elements of that have helped facilitate those conversations. So one is that, excuse me, it took sort of what was previously an informal talk shop called our Coordinating Council for Workforce Development, and it sort of supercharged it into a massive committee that consists of not just the state agency heads, but also representatives of, say, local workforce boards, individual colleges and universities, and also representatives of the K-12 system and many other fields that are relevant, as well as, of course, people from the private sector. So they're tasked with producing an annual unified state plan for workforce development, and that that facilitates a lot of those conversations. That's how we've gotten the agency heads and everybody else behind this concept of stitching all of these data sets together. And then the other piece was, thankfully, the legislature didn't just tell us to do a bunch of things. They also appropriated general funds so that we could bring additional personnel on board. So whereas previously my entire staff was federally funded, we now have a number of positions that are state funded to conduct these various forms of research and analysis that we've been discussing.
Thanks, Brian. Another question for the panel is, the data collection part is obviously a first critical step, but what are your thoughts on the importance of making that data available and understandable to different audiences? Kish, you talked about people at the university. Brian, you talked about having to reach out to employers. How important is it that you make this information available in a way that people can understand and then use in their decision making?
Well, I think it's very important for us to ensure that it's digestible and for us to get into a place of connecting with our industry partners in a way that they can understand how the information is helpful. And one of those initiatives that we've actually just launched is called Marshall Inside, where the workplace becomes the classroom. And so the goal for us is to meet employees where they are and give them an opportunity to connect to our online learning platforms and provide support for them so that they can get the credentials that they want and in the time frame that they are able to attain those credentials. So one of those really critical pieces is making sure that people know how to use it and how it can benefit them, I think, on a granular level. And for us, we've been very intentional about trying to develop and design this in a way that supports that.
Yeah.
Steve, oh.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was just going to jump in. I mean, it's something that's been, I think, really a valuable setup in Minnesota for making the data available is the way our longitudinal data system structure was set up. So I mentioned before having part-time positions embedded at agencies. And so that creates just a natural set of peers that are collaborating around data use and then able to really coordinate, a lot with each other around how we're using each other's data. And so I think that collaboration is really important. I'm used to, having learned a lot about the nuances and details and oddities, et cetera, of higher education data. And then you step into the employment data and you realize, okay, I've got a lot to learn about here as well. And then you hear your colleagues at the workforce agency talk about all the details and they bring up stuff you hadn't thought about yet and all of these things. And so a lot of close collaboration, because then they're also then, and part of that with our longitudinal data system setup is that we have a process for external research requests and just for research requests, period. So coming from a state agency or an external researcher. And so a lot of the projects so the first and third link that I put in the chat, those are under research applications to our longitudinal data system, where then, for that dual training grant report, for instance, that's an OAG SLEDS data report. For the graduate employment outcomes tool, that's our workforce agency doing a SLEDS project. And so that all then is, coordinated and collaborated with through the various committees that are meeting to review and approve those applications. We also then push the data out through secure reports, de-identified individual level data to school districts, high schools, and colleges, where if they have folks that are that have the time and capacity to use that data, they can log in to see just their, high schoolers or their high school graduates, their college graduates, and see the hours worked and wage outcomes in the data there. So I think it's a lot about building out that infrastructure to make the data more available, especially to kind of a next tier of power users in that way, because those are then really the folks that are pushing the data out in their spaces, right? So I mentioned like the University of Minnesota researchers that have worked a lot with SLEDS data, and they have, many PowerPoint presentations on all the great projects that they've done and that are presenting to their stakeholders. And so that's been a really great setup for us.
Thank you. Brian, did you want to add anything?
I would say that we're just in the early stages. As I said, we've only been collecting this data for a year, and we wanted to make sure that it was in good shape before we started publicizing things based on it. But based on my time, and I've been in this role almost 3.5 years, the research is the easy part. It's always a question of first building brand awareness, making sure people know the resources exist, and then communicating them in a way that's understandable to a general audience, which typically means dialing back the jargon a little bit and putting it in a framework. And so in addition to our labor market information website, what's currently being sort of put together is a portal for South Carolina. And the idea is that's going to be the one-stop shop for everybody in the education and workforce ecosystem, from middle school students when they start thinking about careers all the way through career progression. So there's definitely going to be an effort to aggregate our resources together and communicate them effectively.
Yeah, I would just jump in here and build upon some of the great insights there from all three of you, and thinking about it more at a high level, right? Is we're so rich in data nowadays, states in particular. But really, if the data just sits on a server, it's a missed opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to leverage that data to turn it into insights, whether it's through, thinking about the limitations of the existing data and what we'd really want to know, and then how can we improve that data in order to answer some of the big questions that we have. And then the second piece, which I think Dr. Grady spoke to, is the integration of data, which can yield novel insights. So thinking about that, and I think you all kind of spoke to this, but to kind of bring it together, I think the products that come out of that data have to be accessible and digestible, and they also have to be timely. So, what's the turnaround between the point at which we're collecting the data and actually we're building those insights into the system, and they're informing decision making at the micro level. And to be able to do that, it's building accessible products, whether it's dashboards that are disaggregated in such a way that they can actually inform decision making, or reports at the level of the individual institution or provider, or also accessible tools for job seekers and the like. Because really, I mean, the value of this is to help everybody make smarter decisions. And so, having that kind of end goal in mind as we're thinking about, whether data systems development or the productizing and the like, I think is critical.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you so much for our amazing panelists for sharing your insights and your experiences. We know that there's still more to consider, so we're going to jump into our Q&A period. Thanks to all who've submitted questions. Please keep them coming, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can today. I'll start off with the first question that I see. Along with SOC data and hours worked, was there any discussion to collect demographic information like gender or race via employer or social security number to enhance wage records? So were there any other categories that people considered when, like maybe South Carolina? If you could speak to that, Bryan, were there any other considerations?
I would say it was considered. Being South Carolina, I would say that most people in positions of power tend to align with President Trump's stance on DEI issues. So there's not a lot of appetite for looking at that sort of those sort of systemic effects in there. I will say that there's the ability to collect some of that information without necessarily needing to increase data collection capability, because some of that information is collected by your state's DMV or equivalent agency. So driver's license records, and that's also sort of the best metric we have for residency. It's not perfect, but it gives you a complete sense of who is in your state. So there's certainly been conversations about that and other sources like, for example, voter registration records that could potentially allow for a richer data set of that sort. But like I said, there hasn't been a lot of appetite to go in that direction. But certainly something that other states should look into if they're thinking about these issues.
Yeah, for Minnesota, our demographic data is really coming from the higher ed or K-12 data sets. And so bringing K-12, college, and employment all into our state longitudinal data system, the way employment's being analyzed is as an outcome. And so on cohorts on whom we have demographic information. And so that's usually in these analyses that any breakouts by demographics would be based on, often in this case, demographic data coming from the higher ed data sets. And that has been done in Minnesota.
Thank you. We have another question from the chat. And I think we kind of touched on this in terms of like, how do we communicate these data and these opportunities to students in a way that's understandable to them? Kish, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually saw that question in the chat, and I actually used to work in workforce development in West Virginia, so I'm very familiar with that public-facing, student-facing dashboard, which is awesome. In West Virginia, we are working toward an LER mindset. So we are one of the first in the national cohort for the LER accelerator. And so we're excited about that because that's one of our goals, is to make sure that this information gets to students in a way that helps them to make decisions. And I think I shared earlier about that, plugging the brain drain, but we're also trying to build that talent acquisition pipeline. So one of our goals is to ensure that more of our students are aware of the opportunities. And so we have really focused on 7 areas of distinction at Marshall to connect students in a way that they understand what's really kind of hot in the labor market for them. And so those areas are advanced manufacturing, healthcare, advanced energy, aviation, innovation, cyber security, and forensic science. So we're really trying to pull them toward those areas and support them in attaining, like I said, micro-credentials to help them get into opportunities where they can have some work-based learning and really explore more so that we have more of a success rate with our graduates.
So,
and I should also say, sorry, we have a goal, a 2037 goal, to have a 100% placement rate for our graduates as well. So that's why this is also very important.
So in South Carolina, I mentioned this portal that's going to be developed in the next couple of years. That's certainly going to be the focus point, but there are some other resources that are out there. For example, our Department of Education gets our sort of standard labor market information and packages it in a website that I believe there's separate portals for middle school and high school students so they can explore careers. We have resources on our agency's website that get at some of those issues. And one of the things that I think is a little more on the unique side is there are 12 regional workforce advisors in South Carolina, one for each of our local workforce development boards. And they are all about connecting the educational institutions, both K-12 and post-secondary, with the business community in that region. So they're able to go in there and, along with members of my staff, communicate those things in both small and large group settings or individually to students. So we have a number of tools in the toolkit, but certainly the idea is that the portal is going to be where we primarily send everyone.
Thanks, Brian. And then one of the questions is, are there resources you'd recommend for looking at for campaigns around strengthening UI systems and building stakeholder buy-in for this work? I think everybody kind of touched on working with different stakeholders to kind of sell the proposition of what they might get out of the system, but maybe have there been any lessons learned or challenges in engaging that you could share with people to help them move the process along?
At Strada, we are developing a set of resources for states to be able to effectively engage the employer community and solicit buy-in and level set and message effectively vis-a-vis some of the considerations via employer burden that I mentioned earlier, as well as the value proposition for the employer community that as they currently in development, and would love to work with anybody who's interested to share some of those resources if relevant and valuable.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you all for your great questions and for participating in today's webinar. I'd like to give a huge applause for Andrew, Bryan, Steve, and Kish for sharing their perspectives. You've highlighted how powerful using enhanced wage record data can be for answering those big questions about job opportunities. To our audience, we really appreciate each of you joining us and your engagement. If we were not able to get to your question today, we will share our contact information shortly so you can follow up with us directly. Please remember that Education Commission of the States is here to support you in your work. We trust that you're taking away at least one idea from today's webinar and that your state can draw from. If you have questions or requests related to today's session, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. As I mentioned, today's recorded session will be shared in your post-event email. And finally, we're happy to share that registration is now open for our next Partnering for Success webinar. This upcoming session will focus on empowering families with the science of reading. The webinar will take place Wednesday, June 18th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. There'll be a link for you to register. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.